Hi everyone, my name is Sean Walker. I'm a Principal Product Success Architect here at ServiceNow. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the asset administration modules and some of the system properties related to asset creation. The asset administration modules allow asset managers to view and configure settings used for asset and CI management. So asset and CI management refers to creating assets, setting appropriate states and substates, and synchronizing assets and CIs. When an asset has a corresponding configuration item, the asset records and configuration item records are kept synchronized with two business rules. The update CI fields on change, which is on the ALM asset table, and the update asset fields on change, which is in the configuration item table or CMDB CI. So the first thing we'll talk about is the synchronization mappings between the asset and CI for the states and substates. So asset states and CI statuses aren't mapped on a one-to-one relationship. Rather, they're mapped on the most logical counterpart on the other table. So for example, a hardware asset that has a state of in-stock pending disposal, the corresponding CI status is set to in disposition with no substate. This synchronization happens between the asset state fields and the following CI fields. So there's the install status field. The install status field doesn't have a substatus and must be used for non-hardware CIs. And then there's the hardware status and substatus fields that are only visible for hardware CIs. The asset and CI synchronization can be driven in a couple of ways. There's the asset to CI synchronization. So changes to the asset status changes to the asset status updates the logically map CI's install status or hardware status and substatus. And then there's changes from the CI to asset to the CI install status or hardware status updates the logically mapped asset states and substates. So for a CMDB hardware CI, if both the hardware status and the install status is updated, the hardware status change is considered for mapping the corresponding state of the asset. CI's install status and hardware status work independently, so the two fields aren't related. The CI's hardware status change doesn't change the CI's install status and vice versa. So to avoid confusion, keeping both statuses for the CMDB CI hardware isn't recommended. So customers should avoid creating custom asset states and substates or custom CI install and hardware statuses if at all possible. If you do need to create a custom entry for any of these states or statuses, then it's really critical for these new mappings to be created. Otherwise, assets and CIs can become out of sync. I had a time where I had a customer who did lease returns, and they thought it would be a good idea to create a new asset state for lease return. However, they went ahead and made this change. They had the permission in the tool to make this change, and they didn't bother to update the status mappings. So they ended up using this custom state for several months without anybody really realizing it was happening. So as they're processing their lease returns, they're updating the asset state to lease return, yet the corresponding CIs weren't getting updated. So these machines were no longer on premise because they had been returned, yet the CIs still had a status of installed and active. So there was a big discrepancy between both the assets and the CI statuses, which was a giant mess to try and clean up after the fact. So the other thing we'll talk about is the fields synchronized automatically between the assets and CIs. So they're out of the box. There are about 29 fields that are automatically synchronized between the asset and CI. So when you change any of the following fields on the asset or CI record, the same field on the corresponding record is automatically updated. And that goes for everything except for cost, which synchronizes in only one direction, which is the asset to the CI. So the next thing we're going to chat about is a couple of system properties that are used for creation of assets. There's a system property, glide create ALM asset async, which controls whether assets are created immediately when a configuration item is created or if created after a delay. So a delay in asset creation allows a large number of CIs to be created really quickly. So when this property is set to true, assets are created by the asset create asset delay sync, which is a scheduled job that runs every 15 minutes. So when this property is set to false, all the CIs are created immediately. If you upgrading from Vancouver to Vancouver from Orlando or some earlier versions, note this is probably going to be set to false by default in your instance. You can view the status of the scheduled job in the asset job log table, which is asset underscore job underscore log. And then you can see the status of the job that's used to create these new assets from CI every 15 minutes. You can also go to the asset administration module, and there's an asset creation queue, which will show you the list of assets that are queued up to be created by this scheduled job. The next system property is the glide.asset.create_CI with IRE enabled. So this is for IRE-enabled CIs to be created from assets using the ServiceNow Configuration Management Database Identification and Reconciliation Engine, or the IRE. So this property affects CI classes that have an identification rule on serial number and have no dependent relationships with other CI classes. This property is applicable to CI classes that are extended from the hardware CI class, which is CMDB CI hardware. CIs created with the IRE are named in the following format, which is serial number - model name. And the source for these is SN Asset Management. So the default value of this property is false if you're upgrading from earlier releases as well. So I'm now going to jump into an instance and take you through some of the asset administration settings and system properties for asset creation. Okay, so I'm logged into a Vancouver instance of ServiceNow with hardware asset management installed, and I'm logged in as a system administrator because the settings we're going to be showing you today, a lot of them can only be accessed by a system administrator. So to get to the asset administration modules in the filter navigator, you can just type in asset and scroll down until you see the administration section. And here's where you can see the default asset to CI field mappings, the asset to CI install status mappings, and the asset to CI hardware status mappings. So I can just come in here and see these are all the default fields that are automatically synchronized between the asset and the CI. So I can see the asset field on the asset record and the corresponding field name on the CI record. So if you are wanting to ensure that any other fields are added or are synchronized automatically between the asset and CI, you would need to create a new entry here to have those automatically synchronized. The other thing you can take a look at is the install status, asset to install status mapping. And here I'm just going to clear the default. So right now I can tell that my instance does not have any custom states or substates configured because the out of the box filter here is equal to false. So if I just remove that filter, I can see all of the out of the box states and substates to install status mapping. So if we take a look, for example, at this one where the asset state is in stock and the substate is defective, the corresponding CI install status would be pending repair, and this is asset to configuration item only. So when the CI status is set to pending repair and it's set direction sync to both, it's going to go to a substate, asset substate of pending repair and a state of in stock. So again, customers should avoid creating any custom states and substates or install status or hardware statuses unless they absolutely need to. And if that's the case, if they do need to, it's really, really critical that you create a new entry in the asset to CI install status mapping and the asset to CI hardware status mapping for these new states, so that it will keep both the corresponding asset and CI states and statuses in sync. So again, remember, it's not a logical one-to-one relationship. A lot of them are going to be custom or logical type mappings. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the changing the asset state in action and how it updates the corresponding CI records. So I've navigated to my hardware asset dashboard, and I'm going to come into my asset estate and my hardware assets. And what I'm just going to do here is just pick a random asset, and we are going to change the state from in stock to something else, and we're going to see the impact on the corresponding CI. So I'm just going to quickly look up the CI here so we can see it in action in a different window here. And we can just search for our serial number here, and here is the corresponding CI to that asset. So the asset is MS, ends in 314. We can see that these states, our statuses are both in stock. So again, this is asset tag ending in 314. We are going to change this to a state of in use. And when we save this record, we can come back over to the CI record now, and we can see that it's automatically updated the install status and the hardware status based off of the mappings that are in place. The other thing I'm going to show you is the synchronization of fields. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an update to the warranty field on the asset record. And here it is here. So we can see there is no warranty expiration date on the asset record. And if I look at the field here on the CI, there is nothing. So I can basically put in an entry for the warranty date. We're just going to say pick today. And we're going to save this record. And now if we take a look at the corresponding CI record, that has been automatically updated. And let's say I make a change here on the CI record to 2020 instead of 2024, and we save this record, it should update as well on the corresponding asset record. So that's showing you how the states and statuses remain in sync, and also how the asset fields stay in sync. So the other thing we talked about in the presentation part was taking a look at the system properties. So I can just quickly show you those two system properties we were talking about. And so we've got the two, which is glide asset create with CI with IRE, which in my instance is set to true. So that means that assets will go through the IRE when they're created. And then there's the create ALM asset async, which is set to true, which means there will be a delay when creating the assets. So you can create multiple CIs in bulk. So again, just to show this in action, I'm going to go to my hardware asset workspace, and I'm going to create a new asset. And so we're going to make sure it has a model category computer. Let's pick just a random model ASUS. We're going to put in a serial number here. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm just going to copy that. Again, you want to put more thought into creating your assets, but for this demonstration purpose of that system property and the settings that get created and on the corresponding CI, I'm just going to create a very generic CI or asset record. So when I save this, you can see that my CI got created automatically for me. And so if I come back over here, let me go back into that. Go back into my list of CIs and I take a look for that serial number. We can see that it was created. Again, it creates it with the name, which is the serial number and the model. And then it gives it a discovery source of that SN asset management. And so you can tell that this was created because this CI was created by the creation of an asset record. So that's that one system property, and it did go through the IRE to do that. So for example, if I wanted to create a second asset, and we're just going to try and create an identical asset here just to show you the rules that are in place to check for existing serial numbers. So we're going to use the exact same serial number that we used in the last instance, and this should throw an error, right? Because it's going through the IRE, it is checking to see if that serial number exists, and it did exist, so it's not going to create this asset because this one already exists. So this helps prevent duplications from being created as well when you're running through the IRE. The other thing we can do is we can actually create assets by creating a CI first, and that's the other system property. If you remember, my instance is set to true. So what'll happen is I can create multiple CIs in a row, and then the assets are queued up and created in batch every 15 minutes. So test, delay, we're just going to give it a random name. We'll just give it a random asset tag, and we're going to put in a serial number. Let's just call it delay. Going to copy this for later. Going to make sure there's a model ID in here. I'm just going to pick that ASUS again, and I'm going to submit this. And what'll happen is if I came back to try and look now in my asset estate for that serial number, I can see that it hasn't been created. But if I come into my asset administration and I can take a look at my asset creation queue, I can see here that now, because that setting, that property was set to true, there is a delay creating this particular asset. It'll wait for that scheduled job to run, and then before it creates the asset. So I can also go to my scheduled jobs, and I could actually kick that off. If I remember the name of the job, here it is here, asset create delayed sync. So this is the job that runs every 15 minutes to create those assets. So if I just execute this now, instead of waiting the 15 minutes, and I come back now to my asset queue, it's gone. So it's created. So now I can come back into my workspace, and I can just actually refresh this, and there is my asset. So that's really how you can modify and not modify, but just how those different system properties will work for the creation of assets, either from asset to CI or CI to asset. And then also how the fields are synchronized between the asset and CI, and also the importance of the asset states and substates matching to the corresponding CI install status and hardware status. I hope you found this helpful. I'll talk to you soon.